actually used to define the network architecture of your supply chain. Uh, so in every companies, you have many distribution centers, you have many production plants. So what happens is that the sales orders are actually created for the distribution centers. So once the sales orders comes at your distribution center, sales order try to look for the stock. In case the stocks are not there, this sales order stay in the distribution center as unfulfilled demand. During MRP run during MRP run, this unfulfilled demand go ahead and try to find out the plants which can probably supply this requirement, and then this plant can further do their production planning. So SNP is one of the tools that is used to define your distribution center. So here you in the this picture you can see there are 3 distribution centers and 4 plants. So each distribution center is connected to 2 plants. If I take the example of second plant, so we can see the second plant is connected with the distribution center 1 and distribution center 2 through the means of transportation link. So what happens is that distribution center 1 can ask for plant for raw material. Again, distribution center 2 can also ask for raw material from plant. So maybe there's a scenario. So for example, the plant 1 that's on the cannot ask cannot transfer material to distribution center 3 because there is no network. So using such kind of linkages, each of the distribution center is connected to the plant, and a planning run is taken in a hierarchical fashion so that unfulfilled demands can be met. So that sort of network structure is built in SNP. Now, a few minutes back, I was talking about unfulfilled demand and the receipt element created during material planning run. Okay, so what are the different engines or what are the different algorithms does SNP has in terms to take the planning run? Some of the algorithms which SNP has are SNP heuristics, SNP optimizer, and capable to match. So what is SNP heuristic? SNP heuristic is a basic planning run in which there is a two-step planning run. One step it creates a plan order, and in the second step you have to do a capacity level. That is SNP heuristic. So SNP heuristics is ideally used in FMCG industries, widely used in pharmaceutical companies and in FMCG companies where capacity is not a constraint, but production planning is one of the main reason. The benefit of SNP heuristic is that it's a highly it uses the resource at a very low level, so the planning results are can be obtained at a very fast stage. Second kind of planning engine which SNP has is called the SNP optimizer. So what happens in SNP optimizer is a cost based planning engine. It's highly resource oriented, and entire planning that is defined is based on cost of fulfilling a demand versus cost of dropping a demand. If cost of fulfilling a demand is less than the cost of unfulfilling a demand, then only the system will go for production. Okay, so there are various type of costs that can be modeled, and finally based on the cost the system is going to plan. As I spoke, it's a very resource oriented, and companies with lesser number of SKUs ideally go for SNP optimizer, as it's possible to analyze the SNP results if the number of SKUs is less. If it's more, the results take a long time to analyze. Okay, another kind of engine which SNP heuristic has is called the capable to match. Capable to match is a CTM engine. It's a very robust engine and is used in textile and electronics industry. So CTM tool has two variants. One is CTM SNP and CTM PPDS. Few more things as before we proceed ahead. SNP is a bucket oriented planning. What do you mean by bucket oriented planning? The lowest level we can do a planning with SNP is a day bucket. It cannot go into the further granularity. Okay, and so that's it. It's a bucket level planning. And what we spoke few minutes back is the different planning engines that we have in SNP. using which the planning happens. And once the planning has happened, the next step is the deployment. What is actually meant by deployment is that, suppose there are two distribution center, or there is one distribution center, two distribution center requesting stocks from second plant. Okay, now suppose there's a requirement of 50 coming from one distribution center and another 50 coming from another distribution center. So the final demand of 100 has moved to the plant, and plant tries to produce that 100 quantity. But what happens, as the production progresses, they could say only 30, only 60 is produced. Now how do we distribute the 60 stock which is in the plant in the two distribution center? Do we equally distribute, or do we give a preference to a certain plant, or we mention some ratio? That sort of calculation can be defined in your deployment, and based on the deployment rules that are defined, it is going to push the stock to the distribution center accordingly. So once the deployment is done, the next phase of the SNP planning run is transport load builder. So transport load builder is actually used to optimize the vehicle into utilization. So companies have vehicles for transportation like buses, trucks, rails, air. So what happens is, using a transport load builder, and it tries to combine different shipments that are there in the most optimally vehicle that could suitably transport the load. And the last part of SNP run is vendor manage inventory. What is vendor manage inventory? In any production cycle, raw materials form a very important part of production. So how does the vendor know that probably we need a raw material? The vendor would know in case a PO, a purchase order, is sent to the. So instead of sending a manual purchase order to the vendor, in this case the vendor system is connected to our ERP system or APO system, and the vendor can directly see the stock status. And what happens, as soon as the stocks goes up to a certain level, an auto purchase order is generated by the system, and the vendor directly dispatches the goods. So the vendor directly comes in the play or to manage your inventory. Okay, so this is what an SNP architecture looks like. It's mostly a bucket oriented planning, and done and used to do a rough cut planning, and it's also used to define your plant and distribution center structure. Okay, now let us look at now let us look at now let us look at the supply chain planning training, supply network planning training in APO consists of. So basically the training starts with an overview of the supply planning concepts. Whatever, why do we need SNP, how does the SNP fit in the overall APO structure. Followed by that, there is a discussion on the master data that SNP would need to start before planning. So what are the master data? Basically that comes in is a material master, then you have the resource master, then you have PDS, PPM, transportation lane, and many other master data that come into. And SIF, core interface, would be used to transfer the master data from ECC to APO, because all the master data will be created in ECC. So followed, once the master data is created, the system is ready to plan, and we can create a transactional data like a forecast or a sales order, and use a forecasting planning method like heuristic optimizer or CTM to take a planning run and see the planning results. Once the planning result is ready, and probably stocks are produced, a deployment run can be taken. So it creates confirmed stock transfer requisitions, and once the deployment is created, we can group deployment orders under TLB run, so that the best vehicle could be selected that can send the goods to the customer. Further, there's a discussion on core interface. How does core interface work, and what is the master data integration with R3? Creation of integration model, how does background jobs work, and how to schedule them. Further, there are advanced scenario like block planning in SNP, and many other advanced scenarios. So this is basically a very rough cut picture of what SNP training looks like. Depending upon understanding, if in case further information is needed, we would be